From KCRW Santa Monica, I'm Michael Silverblatt, and this is Bookworm. Oh, listen, I'm very excited. Today, I have as my guest Joe McElroy, whose novel, Actress in the House, has been published by the Overlook Press. This is a novel I've been waiting for somewhere since his last novel. I got worried and called him up to ask him how he is and would there be a novel. I hadn't heard anything of or from him, and I have to say, from the time I began reading his second novel in 1969, I've been an enormous and overwhelmed, a constant admirer. There are months and seasons when I think that Joe McElroy is one of the only serious writers in America. I am overwhelmed by him. When I read you this list of books, know that I've read most of them 3 or 4 times and that it's a genuine honor to be sitting face to face with him. This is the first time that Joe McElroy has been on Bookworm. His books are A Smuggler's Bible, Heinz Kidnap, Ancient History, A Paraphrase, Lookout Cartridge, Plus, Women and Men, The Letter Left to Me, and now Actress in the House. Actress in the House is published by Overlook, who are committed to bringing his works back into print. Already, when you hear this, his first novel, A Smuggler's Bible, will be available in bookstores in paperback. Others of them, like his masterpiece, Women and Men, are available from Dalkey Archive Press. One can find his books, but they're all going to be back in print, which is a great pleasure. Now, it's a tricky thing, because I think this is a writer who will alter your life and your consciousness. He did mine. And there are many times when he's been grouped with writers that people regard as the more intellectual writers of our century, but I think he is as intuitive as he is intellectual, and that the process of patient reading will bring you into a whole new vocabulary, new way, new order of seeing, a dismantling of categories and hierarchies. And I want to begin by asking Joe McElroy, my guest, what is this, so to speak, newer reality accurate to?
What I've always been trying to find was an adequate sentence and passage that could suggest what it is like to be fully alive. And that means to be thinking and feeling and moving even in a physical way that could be conveyed on the page. For me to say that I'm a realist really doesn't mean very much, because after all, it could refer to the American naturalist tradition, it could refer to Flaubert, it could refer to Joyce. Maybe, although I'm not really much like Joyce, I would think of that type of realism as being closer to what I'm after, because while my books are not about language, not in the sense that is sometimes presented in experimental quarters as all literature is about. Language is obviously an instrument. My books are about the intersection of the language that we have, that we live by, the idioms, the American language, for example, and all the other idioms that have to do with different kinds of knowledge. The intersection of these with the constant attempt to make connection with other people and to understand what it is to be alive. And while my books have plots and they aim to get somewhere, always, and the traditional matters of character conflict and pain and surprise are there. And I'm not even sure I can say what is different about my work, but I think that somewhere in the consciousness of the writing, there is an attempt to respond to the shock of being alive with a dissolution of of everything that we've been prepared to lean on, so that in the course of a fiction, in the course of a narrative, we have a model for waking up all over again.
Now, I can tell you, Joe McElroy, and you, the listener, what makes this work different from other work. And it begins inevitably with the beginning, with the titles. I think that in your work there's an interest in simultaneity and a desire for a language to reflect what goes on as the mind is in the world. And that therefore, early on, puns and different kinds of figures, not jokes, but the rhymes language provides to itself, shape the books so that at the same time as there's a kind of big bang spreading, there's also a weird economy. The title of the new book, Actress in the House, becomes immediately an example as we realize that the house is a term that theater people use to refer to the theater.
Though, of course, the book takes place, well, not only in the streets of New York, but in the house of Daly, the other character.
And you know that while the actress in the house in a theater might be a normative description, an actress in the house, meaning household, this might be a perfidious person or a deceiving one.
Indeed, an actress in the house, an actress loose in the house.
I thought that we would begin by listening to the first several paragraphs of the book, read by my guest, Joe McElroy. This is the opening of Actress in the House, the beginning of the first chapter called First Night.
A shock, that's all it was, in the darkened house. The girl, struck by her partner very hard. It had staggered her. It was over the line. You wondered how she was standing. Her partner had clapped her one to the side of her face with the dull flat of his hand, and it had swung her right around toward the audience, almost knocked her off the stage, and she was hurt. The man in the 8th row from his angle hadn't seen it coming, but neither had she seen it, you could almost believe, the actress herself. Something wrong up there. He was stunned and amazed. He was honestly thrilled, not stunned at all. A sound from the house, a gasp, a groan, almost a word. You could probably understand her partner's reaction, what she'd sprung on him, meddling in his home life. God, a small disaster in his life. The actor's arm coming up out of nowhere, so quick it wasn't acting, it was over the line. Assault, a desire to rid the place of her not to be denied voice, her face. But he can't. At one blow, it all goes to pieces, a blow like that. It says it all. But what? It all comes together. The man in the 8th row could be up there with her.
Now, just to give you an idea of what starts to happen, the first surprise is that a man is slapping a woman, but immediately we're told it's on a stage. But a sub-surprise of sorts comes with the word clapped, because this is what the audience presumably will do. And so there's a kind of language that keeps doubling. It takes the setting, the place for applause, into the emotional violence of the circumstance. Clapped her on the side of the head with a dull hand.
Everyone is an audience to everybody else.
Yes, and you get a hand in the theater.
I never thought about that, Michael. She got a hand.
Yes, exactly. And what we begin to hear in the darkened house are bits of incantation that we will be hearing throughout the novel. It was over the line. Who does she think she is? And these phrases, repeated in different contexts, will have new meanings or reverberatory meanings. And what happens in a truly eerie way is it's something that we think we've gotten used to, the Pirandello thing of actors pretending not to be actors. in this book we don't know quite. Has this man slapped her? Is what she bleeds stage blood? We're told that it's honest blood and that the observer is honestly thrilled. But we're also told that he's stunned, and yet we know, in fact, that she is stunned, or seems to be. And so constant interpenetration of little bits of language that could belong to the person looking or the person being acted upon.
I tried for that. I did. In the early responses to the book, some people spoke of it as if it was the actress's book, Becca's book. But it isn't. It's more Daly's book, honestly. But it is a book for both of them. And I think that not only in dialogue, but in the language as you describe it, splintering, disintegrating, coming back together, repeating in echoing and musical ways, I've tried to connect those two people. I always want them to be separate people, but I've tried to connect them in odd ways, as if words sometimes answer words.
Now, he is a lawyer in whose office there is also an employment service that was once run by his ex-wife, Della, who had been a dancer. And there's a sense of metamorphosis, that a dancer becomes an employment counselor, that a lawyer inherits the employment agency on his wife's death, a movement, a thing that says to us from the very beginning that life is not settled. And it is in the figure of the actress, who is two things simultaneously, a person and the person playing her role.
Indeed.
And very much in this book, what the attempt seems to be is to describe a fuller field of human possibility, one where we are not defined by what we do, but by what we might do as well, by our interests, our happenstance, our coincidences. And it seems that it's not just, as you said before, to find a sentence to describe what it means to be fully human, but to ask what it means to be fully human.
Yes, and I suppose there's a parallel to this notion of fiction that I have, that it is, while obviously it is about what did happen, because it must turn upon memory. Memory is a complicated thing. You remember fantasies as well as facts, and who knows what the facts are that you remember. And so I think of fiction as being even more about what could happen than about what did happen. And what could happen connects with what you just said. The could is always there. In fact, it is even there at the end of the book. But it is certainly there, a sense of potential, a word I think I use early in the book, a sense of unpredictability. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we might have called it existential. We don't use the word much anymore. But it's accepting, I suppose there's an optimistic side to it. It's accepting what could happen.
Well, the way I describe it, perhaps you'll remember this, my guest, Joe McElroy, spent a good part of his early life in Brooklyn Heights, but at the entrance to the amusement park steeplechase, there used to be a barrel laid on its side that was always rolling, and you could go into the amusement park by walking through this barrel, this rolling barrel. You would have to do it by walking the side of the wall and moving sideways.
How well I remember it.
And, well, there was also a human pool table, which was before my time. But frequently you'd take a spill, and you'd experience the inside of this cylinder as one that you needed to escape from, and by the time you got out, you'd been rearranged. You know, your sense of what the ground was. You had to rebalance yourself. So always at the beginning, I think, of a Joe McElroy novel, there's a shock, whether it's the shock of the slap of birth or a city scene in Heinz Kidnapped, too rich and detailed to be taken fully in, but oddly containing things a city wouldn't contain. A cow is being led into an art director's office. and more than one is prepared for, and unsettling in the service of what I will still call a kind of hyper-realism, fuller detail than one expects to find.
I want to keep the word realism, understanding, as I said a moment ago, that it's not an easy word because it can mean so many other things, but I would never want to think that what I'm after isn't something that I'd be willing to call the real. But it is large and it is in motion. And I think for the reader and me, the two of us together, there has to be a dislodging of whatever preparations we had in order to get going. And that doesn't mean that it's all that hard. It just means a little patience and a little bit of acceptance. And life, to me, is like that. It's waking up every day is like that.
And by the way, I'm Michael Silverblatt. The show is Bookworm. The book is Actress in the House, published by the Overlook Press. And my guest is the author, Joseph McElroy, Joe McElroy. As a seasoned McElroy reader, I tend to read his first 40, 50, 100 pages 3-4 times before continuing with the book, because I know also that he, in his process, rewrites before he continues with the book, and I'll have to take a good deal in order to proceed. And so I saw the mention of a particular acoustic machine capable of dampening sound, of causing sound, one assumes, in crowded places, restaurants, to be recessive, while a kind of white sound, a white noise, takes the foreground. And then I began to notice in the book, suddenly there'd be sentences that would begin and not end, and that almost as if the machine were regurgitating, the end of the sentence would appear pages later. Along with that, there's a musician who is said to have a remarkable ear, by which it is meant not an ear for music, which he also has. He's ill, and his hearing is becoming more acute as his other senses dull, and so he's hearing things that we as readers don't hear or don't yet know the meaning of. And this way of moving through a transactional auditory world is also similar to the way people talk to one another, who can be counted on from moment to moment to not fully be listening to one another, to not fully understand what one another say, and
of course it is never that I don't care. It's never that I don't care that people connect. That's not why I write occasionally, anyway, the way I do, in that way that you're describing. It's always that I want to include the struggle and the accident and the disorder that is part of the effort and even the lack of effort that we make to connect, and to connect not only with each other but to connect with the future.
Well, for me it becomes a higher fidelity to our actual case in the world.
I hope so. I'll let you say that.
That's what's always impressed me, finally, and that removes the work from that status of solving puzzles to a recognition that these are the puzzles that make up our lives, and that by not recognizing that these problems exist, we live in a world of half-communications and assumptions that we've understood things that we haven't. And then in addition, we live in a world in which most of our novels do not take into account the events of our own times. So most characters in books are living according to presuppositions of an earlier century's novels. They're not even up to relativity. And these characters, in a sense, are being observed as they transact a world that might well be like an echo chamber or a bombardment chamber. More things than they can handle are coming at them, of which they are temporarily aware and then unaware. And there are things beyond their ken, and there are things deeper to their ken. One of the characters here seems to be, to some extent, clairvoyant, or at least from time to time and over, he dreams of a telephone that rings, waking him up, when in fact the phone rings once he wakes up.
Yes, indeed. And he resists. It's important for me in the creation of the character to have this happen. He resists the notion that he might have what the kids say nowadays are powers, that he might have special powers. It's important for me that he not be presented as being clairvoyant. But by the end of the book, I think you realize that this ordinary guy, this lawyer, without insisting on it to himself, without even claiming it, does have unusual powers.
The thing that I think of as thrilling in these books, which are regarded or called difficult, what I think is difficult about them is that they take something that a lot of people take easily, that the world has a metaphysical dimension. This is something that, in a sense, McElroy is pulled into, kicking and screaming, because his characters want a good deal of evidence. They are, the men, characteristically lawyers, journalists of various kinds carrying their tape recorders into the world. But they discover in this tumult the possibility of larger meanings, of inter-significations that turn these books into, for me, modern leaps of faith, spiritual experiences, but ones that don't allow for the easy leap of faith. Okay, I'm going, I'm there. I like it better than the real world. I want the world that's numinous. No, this is a border transaction, a crossing of thresholds, and the result of constant observation. But you, in the books, have seen this as a visionary experience, and plus there's a mind severed from its body, creating through synapses of memory the body it was once a part of.
The growth, of course, transacted in not only in language, but in recognizable facts that the language refers to that you could call technological and scientific. If science discovers and technology invents, I think that distinction is not a very solid one, but I hear it often. Those languages and processes are very much part of that book. And I don't think for a minute that I'm taking, by means of science and technology, the reader to a threshold at which we then must make a leap of faith. That sounds like St. Thomas Aquinas or somebody. But I think that something like what you've described happens that brings the reader, by means of processes that are secular and complex and very contemporary, to moments or thresholds at which maybe something almost like grace occurs. I'm talking with religious language, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm in any way a traditional religionist. But I think in Ancient History, my third novel, I wanted to bring the reader to, through a curious quest involving all kinds of evidences and figurings, yet then to a moment when something is given to the narrator, almost as if some power was given to him as a gift, but not really for all that he'd done. That's why I call it like grace. Nothing he deserved, but somehow it was all reversed. This effort, these languages out of journalism and technology and all the rest, these searches that we associate with with law, with science, with technology, with now. These searches brought him who knows where, but then something happens, and something is given to him unexpectedly.
Well, that unexpected can be as ordinary in that book, Ancient History, as a child, an infant, calling for orange juice. The child says, "Ang Zeus," and Zeus appears, in the course of the baby's articulation, and becomes, the suggestion that the book has of deity. Yes, accident, but yes, right below the surface of our language, waiting for us, the trapdoor to more, to plus.
Yes, I think Michael, that what you said is very helpful, because you not only describe what I write and also some motives that I have, but it helps. I mean, Matthew Arnold thought that criticism should help the poet by telling the poet what he was doing and helping him, therefore, to go further. But I think that what you just said about language waiting underneath the surface is right on, and of course it is not dictionary vocabularies and thesauruses and all waiting under the surface only. It is, of course, that, but it is thesauruses of feeling and thesauruses of unexpected possibility.
I'm speaking to Joseph McElroy, and we will continue talking to him next week. His new book is Actress in the House, a novel published by Overlook Press. Thank you for joining me, Joe.
Thank you, Michael.
You can read the first chapter of Actress in the House on the Bookworm page at kcrw.com. It's my suggestion throughout this show that if you have not experienced the work of Joe McElroy, there's something truly that you have missed. There is something new under the sun, but in this case it has been under the sun for more than 30 years. Thank you for joining me. My associate producer is Melinda Siegel. The technical director is Ray Guarna. Special production assistants from Alan Howard and Mario Diaz. I'm Michael Silverblatt. Join me again next week on Bookworm.